Thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to echo with the previous speaker, the Honourable Gentleman sentiment that we did ask a number of questions to the Minister before the dinner break and did not receive an answer other than it will give confidence. And I guess from that, I want to ask the Minister, confidence for whom? Because it certainly is not the workers who were caught by surprise of this particular piece of legislation. So if the Minister wouldn't mind elucidating to the House, what does she mean by confidence? But just to remind the Minister again of the questions that we're asking, and the fact that we are having to ask these questions because there's no information and no context for this bill, no analysis that we know of that's been done. So we really need to know from the Minister what analysis have been done for this. So again, going back to my questions for section 4.2, and ask the Minister questions around risk and around cost-benefit analysis, around both in terms of the 70% threshold, but also in terms of the 10 consecutive years, on what confidence does she have that employers and corporates aren't going to manipulate the legislation in a way that will always not quite meet the threshold on year 9, for example. Year 10, they change the system a bit. Is the system going to be reset? Oh, we're looking at, because it says 10 consecutive years, which means that a company could reasonably change the system in year 10 to reset the 10 consecutive years for them to start again from year 1 the next year, and there's nothing that employees can do about it. I can see the Minister smiling, but at the same time, I don't know. I genuinely don't know if that is something that has been considered, because that could, in all likelihood, like anything else, be a scenario that could eventuate. So could the Minister respond if that has been considered or any of the analysis has been done from a risk perspective? I also asked the Minister on who she consulted in terms of this particular legislation. Has she consulted with any workers' organizations or unions on this legislation before introducing it to the House? And like the previous speaker, Honourable Gentleman has also mentioned, what other areas has she modelled this legislation on, other than Manitoba, Canada? But that's one part of my question. I would like to ask a few questions, and this is more broadly around Section 6 under purpose. Now, the purpose section has also fundamentally changed from what is the current purpose of the existing legislation. But I want to pick up on a few key words in this new purpose section, and particularly I want to pick up on what the Minister means by process. Because the current definition is actually very clear in terms of the fact that it needs to be a simple process. Whereas there's nothing in here, there's no adjective that gives me confidence that this process isn't going to be increasing the blue tape and yellow tape of this government and going to make it a really complex and arduous process for people to claim equity, pay equity or gender-based pay equity. And I also wanted to check with the Minister, in light of the definition of Section 2B, has she received any legal advice on whether the purpose section can potentially override the definition of Section 4.2 when it comes to the definition of systemic and predominantly? Because again, one of the things that we have been talking about is the fact that the systemic has been presumed to mean 10 consecutive years and predominantly has been presumed to mean 70%, but has that been checked by legal to mean that, to also suggest that people cannot challenge it? Because as the Minister would understand from statutory interpretation, the purpose may override other definitions.
I call Tracey McLellen.
There's a few things that I was going to say I find confusing about this piece of legislation, but I'm not personally confused. I worked for an organisation that championed pay equity and spent an awful lot of time working with comparators and working our way through a process that was very clearly laid out and was achievable at the end. But there's something about what the Minister has responded to questions so far that doesn't quite sit well with me. And if, for those paying attention at home or for those who have been listening to the 2 or 3 contributions that the Minister has made to date, she's talked about sex-based discrimination. She said things like, if you feel you've been discriminated in your workplace. So it kind of reeks of this classic libertarian kind of concept of the unit of analysis being the individual. And that is completely at odds with what the pay equity legislation was designed to do, because it was about rectifying historical undervaluation of what tends to be women's work, but certainly not exclusively women's work. And if we look back at the history of that, suffice to say a history lesson, but you know, there were 2 types of work in our economy historically: the productive work that tended to be done by men and therefore valued as such and paid accordingly, and reproductive work that tended almost exclusively to be done by women. And then over the years, it moved into the types of occupations like nursing and caring and all of those things, where women may have worked outside the home, but were still involved in what was considered reproductive work, caring work. And throughout history, throughout the world, those forms of activity, those forms of genuine work have always been undervalued. Hence the fact, in the same organisation in the 60s or the 70s as as Helen White has previously pointed out, two people could do the same work, and if one was a man, they would receive what was called a family wage, whilst the woman would receive tokenism, essentially, because she didn't need to be paid. It's the same sort of argument we hear when we talk about youth rates from this government. But as a modern society, as a contemporary society, we're supposed to redress that. Those are antiquated, old-fashioned ideas. So it's taken years to try and address that. That's why some perfectly, incredibly valuable work that's skilled and that has autonomy, that may have budget responsibilities, that may have life and death responsibilities, are still underpaid compared to what has been traditionally male-dominated work that doesn't have near as much responsibility, or arguably doesn't necessarily add as much value, even if we want to be cut and dry about it in a productive economic sense. So when the Minister talks about this as if it's some sort of contemporary problem going forward, she wants to see this rectified going forward to make it easier, she's completely denying and completely overshadowing the fact that we've still got a lot of work to do to even the playing field and to fix up that which has not been appropriately sorted. And so to change the rules and to make the criteria so much more strict, so much more just not even very well thought out or practical solutions to a problem just defies belief, really. So thinking about that and taking that into a contextual sort of background, I have several questions for the Minister. The first one, though, is that we have 33 pay equity current claims. So by virtue of the fact that we haven't been through a select committee process, we don't have a regulatory impact statement, can the Minister take us through all of those 33 existing cases and talk us through the analysis and the advice that she's been given on each of those individually about what the costs to the government are, what the savings the government will make, what workers and people, not just women, but men who are now currently working in traditionally woman-dominated fields who are also getting paid an undervalued wage. I want to know more details about that, because without a proper process, we're flying blind, and it's up to the Minister to provide that information tonight.
I'd like to give an answer on behalf of Brooke van Veldon before she sits down there and answers the question. Well, I don't believe that we need to sit there and give the answers. I've got no intention to answers. I reject the premises of the questions that have been asked there, and I believe it will save money. It will save us a lot of money, but it won't be at the expense of women's wages, and this is a win.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I quickly skimmed over that super juicy cabinet paper while I was busy eating dinner. Thanks to Nick for posting that. But yeah, the cost of settlements to date, 1.55 billion per year. So now you know where the money came from for the damn helicopters. Unfortunately, the risks in the cabinet paper are obscured, so we can't read them. But yes, Karen McAnulty was correct. This amendment is a repeal, and this is affirmed in the cabinet paper, and I quote, "The proposals for a reset contained in this paper involve changes for all of these elements in the current financial oversight and governance settings for pay equity." So, yeah, he's correct. This is a repeal.
I because this is sort of relatable, I'd like to go back to something that Robert Pittman was sort of saying on our show on Friday, because this is another very Trumpy type policy. They're mimicking off Trump again, which is quite interesting. And I loved, because this is very relatable, I loved how Robert was sort of saying how we seem to be copying Trump policy quite a lot, which I thought about a lot over the weekend.
It does seem to be that way. Like David Seymour campaigning about taking us out of the Paris Accord if we win the election in 2026.
But what do you think that is? What do you think they're copying his line of policies, Trump's lines? Because it saves money. So it doesn't save money for me and you. It saves money for the upper crust of society in the form of tax cuts, right?
Yeah.
What they're going to go for whatever can make them more money, or whatever can whatever can save their mates more money, or whatever they can make a profit off of. That's neoliberalism in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But the thing that gets me is they do this new policy, right? But then it was revealed late this week that they spent $20,000 to bring out one of Trump's former advisors back to this country that already had citizenship here. So that was quite interesting.
Is it that guy from Matamata?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know about that case.
No, but there is someone there. I'm trying to think.
Chris Liddell, or whatever his name is.
Yeah, the one who was born in Matamata.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
yes. Actually, that would get interesting because if he's over here as a diplomat in the United States, but also a citizen of the country he's been a diplomat in, what happens to his diplomatic immunity?
But regardless, they spent $20,000 to bring him home for one conference.
Jesus. Okay, well, how much money does it cost to bring in an advisor? Yeah, $20,000. Like, for fuck's sake, yeah.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, News Guide, The Order Paper Podcast. YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, News Guide, The Order Paper Podcast.